so much. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I am your moderator today. I'm Tanya, representing the Wellness Specialist. I'm happy to have you all with us today. So I'm just going to start with whoever's first, and then just if we can just share a little bit about ourselves with each other. So Tabby, I've got you first. Would you like to share a little bit with us?
Absolutely, absolutely. I am Tabisi Lesitaba. I am a co-founder and a COO at Sendoff app. So what we do at Sendoff is that we've created a web and a mobile platform that digitizes the entire value chain of organizing a funeral. So what that means in essence is that we've partnered with different service providers on a national level so that we are able to help people arrange the funerals of their departed loved ones from wherever they are. So what we've seen is that, it can be so chaotic in arranging a funeral. So what we wanted to do was to ease the logistical burden and also be able to, create an information center where people are able to come and get the relevant information, vetted and reliable service providers, which is quite important in this industry, and really be able to understand all things around death, end of life, and really death care.
Thank you so much, and we're so happy to have you with us today. Thank you. Lisa, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everybody. I'm a specialist wellness counselor. I'm just here to learn a little bit more about bereavement, especially for mothers, because I think that's such a big community that gets overlooked often. So that's the only reason I'm really here. And I'm so grateful. Thank you so much, Tanya, for this opportunity, and to Priscilla for this, because I think it's really needed, especially in South Africa.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for joining us. Sinta, I have you next.
Thank you, Tanya. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sinta Everson, and I'm a post-traumatic growth practitioner. That includes trauma debriefing, also a resilience practitioner. But basically, I'm passionate about helping people through trauma and helping them to learn the lessons that those experiences offer so that we can grow from it and thrive. So that's what I'm all about. I'm grateful and honored to be here and be a part of this conversation. And I look forward to getting to know all of you better.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sinta. Parishka, we have you next.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Prashika, and I'm a wellness counselor from Prashika B Wellness Counseling. And apart from that, I'm also a mum who went through losses. And it's not just a loss, but I went through numerous losses. And I even lost a baby, who was born at Prem. And he did survive a week. So, it's still a loss for me that I went through. So yes, so it's a little bit about me and my losses and my counseling. I am the wellness counselor here. I have my own practice, and my niche right now is I deal with a lot of parents and moms and dads who go through losses as well. So I'm in a medical suite and stuff where there's lots of other doctors with me. And that's one of my main focus in my practice is people who are dealing with losses and going through losses, whether it's through pregnancy, early pregnancy losses, or even when they do lose babies at stillbirth as well. So yes.
Thank you, and we're so happy to have you with us today. Thank you. Bridget, I have you next on the screen.
Good morning, everyone. I'm basically working as a healthcare administrator. My undergrad degree is in psychology. So then I did a postgrad diploma in public health, and now I'm a master's candidate of public health. So the reason I wanted to participate in this webinar is that I usually get people around me who have lost a child one way or the other. Some they are going through emotional pain currently. One of them has just lost a fetus. So now I do not know how to support them in such time of need. So I need to equip myself so that whenever someone comes to me with such a problem, I am able to assist in every possible way I can. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to introduce our speakers today. So we're going to be speaking to Tabi, we're going to be speaking to Sunta, and we're going to be speaking to Parishka. I'm going to be asking a couple of questions, and I'd like to thank you all for being part of the webinar. As you know, I have introduced myself already. I'm your moderator. I represent TWS. I've also experienced the loss, and we want to give hope. We want to give hope with Mother's Day coming up and how we experience Mother's Day after a loss. So I'm going to just put the questions out and just call one person at a time, or we can just open up the conversation. I'm going to also ask Tabi to assist me with some of the questions, and let's just speak about it. Let's get into the topic about it and speak about it and give that hope. So I'm going to get your first question. I'm going to get it for you. Okay, let's look at what we're going to be discussing. What are the gaps currently with serving families who have gone through child loss and baby loss, especially with minorities and underprivileged communities? So if we could open it up to our speakers and put that question out there, what would you say the gap is currently? Tabisa, do you want to go first, Tabi? I can see you first on the screen. I'm not picking on you. If you want to speak first, or if anyone else wants to answer, you're welcome to.
I think, Tanya, if I were to answer, I would definitely be answering from the arrangement, the support from the families, from the society, and well as, the different service partners that help you to arrange a funeral. So I think one of the biggest things I've identified in our society today is that people don't really understand grief. They don't really understand bereavement. And you look at things like, the other day I shared a post on LinkedIn and I said kudos to, I think it's Unilever. Now they have offered a bereavement leave to parents that have just lost their kids. I mean, these are great initiatives that are only starting to pop out now. Previously, people were expected to come back to work as if nothing just happened. And these are mothers who have lost their kids, And I think people also need to understand that losing a child is quite a personal experience, particularly in people of my culture. There are a lot of cultural dynamics. And I feel that people tend to dictate how the mother should, arrange the funeral, how the mother should grieve. You'd find sentiments like the mother should not cry because the baby is not going to transition properly. They'll be worried that their mother has experienced such a trauma. So I'd say the biggest gap is educating families around grief and bereavement support, particularly for mothers going through, child loss, and also not being prescribing of how parents should grieve for their kids, and really understanding that grief takes time. And I mean, I keep on having this conversation with Keshini, and she says that, when it comes to grief, it's not prescribed to a year or 2 or 3. It can be 10 years and you're still grieving. So people need to really understand that it's a personal experience and it's different for everyone. And we cannot necessarily rush, mothers. And secondarily to that, I think people lack a sense of understanding that losing a child and trying to replace a child with the child you've lost only adds more trauma than actually healing. So I think we need to start having these healthy conversations where it's non-judgmental, people are able to express their feelings and they're able to get the help of, some of the people in this in this conversation in terms of how to really grieve and how to really be supportive to whether a friend, a colleague, or even a spouse. So I think that the gaps there are education around bereavement and the support.
Thank you for that, Tavi, and I agree. We have to create healthy conversation around it, and the grieving process too. It's you know, often we do focus on the mom, and I think sometimes the dads also just need a bit of assistance and help. And so the opening up of the conversation is so important for both parents, you know, and the healthy conversation around it. So thank you for that. Cinta, I do have you next.
Harvey, I'm very interested in what you shared with us about the cultural expectations of mothers who lose their children. I'd love to learn more about that. If we might perhaps get to that topic in more detail a bit later, Tanya. My own personal experience was a miscarriage. This was a number of years ago, but from a medical point of view, I also experienced that there was absolutely no support. There was not even a conversation about the loss. It was a matter-of-fact situation where the medical issues were tended to, and I was sent home after that, and that was it. There was no support offered or even an invitation to talk about it. It was actually quite weird. But at the time, I was much younger than I am now. I also just sort of filed the situation and carried on with life, and fell pregnant again quite soon after that. And just carried on with life and just never actually dealt with the situation. And I think if the medical professionals, like the gynecologists and maybe the, you know, the medical other staff that are involved, or the nurses in the wards where you are when you have a miscarriage, would perhaps be also better educated. Or maybe there would be somebody like our trauma debriefers present there, or, you know, available to support these people. Just to open a conversation, and maybe just extend an invitation that that there isn't a possibility for a conversation of some support. So I think I would agree with Tavi. It comes down to education. There's a lot of education to be done to the medical profession also, who deals with this, and maybe provide more support.
Thank you, Cinta. Yeah, I definitely agree, 100%. There has to be more education around it. There has to be more support, in the sense of it's got to be an option, because it doesn't always impact in the beginning. There's the impact afterwards as well. And then the impact of going through, as you mentioned, sometimes you go through a loss and you end up being pregnant very soon after that, and your pregnancies are impacted. I know personally for me, what had happened was I had a loss, and then very soon after that was pregnant, and my whole pregnancy was just, it was terrible, because I still had that recall of what was going on previously to it. So I do, yes, that's medically, education is really important. Thank you, Cinta. Thank you for sharing that with us. Parishka, I have you next.
Sure. So, I mean, just to add on to what Tavi and Cinta were saying, I'm going to share my own personal experience here, right? And it's basically going to validate what Tavi and Cinta did say. Because when I had a loss, I mean, as I said earlier on, I went through so many losses, right? My first loss, when my husband and I decided to fall pregnant and have a baby, I had an ectopic pregnancy. And during that ectopic pregnancy, I had to go, eventually, I actually lost one of my tubes because of that whole process that happened. And to add to what Cinta was saying, when I went through that, that was my first pregnancy, and it was a planned pregnancy as well. You know, from something being so exciting, because I mean, for the moms out here, you know, when you see that, when you want to have a baby, and when you get that first positive pregnancy test, you know, when you look at it and like, yes, I'm pregnant, and you know, it's only good thoughts that come to your mind, because the fact that you planned for that pregnancy, you had all these thoughts to fall pregnant. And now that you are pregnant, you only think, oh, this is going to be the brilliant thing ever. And then you immediately start thinking about this baby's growing in me. And then you never think what's going to happen if something goes wrong. In my case, something did go wrong. So when I went to my doctor, and like, we couldn't see the baby, you know, during our ultrasounds. And I was like now going almost every 3 to 4 days trying to find this baby. Now, neither is my doctor telling me that, you know, this could be an ectopic. because I'm doing blood tests and everything's increasing the way it's supposed to, right? According to medical reasons, right? So everything did what it's supposed to do. However, we're not seeing a baby. And my doctor was so calm about it. I guess it is their profession. This is what they do. I can't expect my doctor to be emotional the way I am, because this is what he deals with all the time. So eventually, when we came through the process of this is an ectopic pregnancy, and I had to go for the operation, they had options, and my follow-up after the loss now, because remember, this was still a so-called live baby in me, and it was an ectopic pregnancy, because when we do my blood test, and if everything's increasing, that means something in me is growing for things to be increasing. Your bloods are all going up, and it was going well for me, except we couldn't find the baby. So after the loss and then my operation and my first follow-up appointment, there was no such thing as like, how are you feeling? How to deal with that loss? There was nothing. He came to my rooms and whatever the afternoon of the operation, and like, no, nothing. Okay, so this is what we're going to do for your next pregnancy. This is what we're going to take, and this is what we're going to do. So there was no empathy, right? I want somebody to tell me, or to hold me so I can cry about it, right? I don't want to really focus on the pregnancy. I want to feel the pain that I'm going through. And they don't have that, I think, in the medical field. And the reason for that is maybe because they deal with so many cases. And for us as moms who lose a baby, we are the patient only. We are not friends with these doctors. We're not colleagues. We are really just their patient, So because of my own experiences that way, and as I said, I have my own practice in a medical suite as well now, where there are doctors who deal with this. I've actually now said to these doctors, I said, listen, it's not easy for these moms. We don't know what these moms go through. When you have a situation when a mom, there's no heartbeat, or it's an ectopic or something, offer this mom free counseling, right? Give them an option not to fall pregnant again. Deal with what's happening there. They have a loss, give them those options. And that's why I do what I do on my side in my practice, right? Also, I noticed that with people, and depending on the communities, like even in my community, in my husband's family and the way they are, in terms of, my husband's from India, right? So we are Hindus, and our beliefs are a little bit different from each other. So with my husband, it's like, in his culture and his loss, in his family, loss is not something that, when it comes to a baby and a pregnancy loss, they don't really deal with it. There's nothing to deal with. It's just something that happened and you get over it once you get home from the hospital or the doctor. However, like with my family, it's like, it's a loss. So everybody's there as a family to support, and for me, that's what I want. I want everybody to be there. I might tell you, no, I don't, I want to be alone. But honestly, I don't want to be alone. And I want you here. So that's where family for me comes in. And I noticed that with some of the people I've been speaking to is that in some culture, right, like it's something that you need to be quiet about. You don't talk about it. You don't talk about you pregnant, and neither do you talk about your loss when you go through a loss. So for those moms and dads, it's not just moms. I can guarantee the dads feel it. Maybe not as bad, but they do feel something, because I know what my husband went through. And for me to say to people that, oh no, you just keep quiet about it and you move on, it doesn't work like that. And what Tabi was saying earlier on is that some people go through loss, we focus on falling pregnant again. Because I went through that as well, Tabi. I mean, when I lost my son at 29 weeks, and he survived for a week. So we went through all that interaction with him and everything. But when I did lose him, I didn't focus on my son that I lost. I focused on falling pregnant again, right? So when I did have a baby, and now my baby's turning 3 this weekend, I only really felt that grief of losing my son after my daughter was born. And then I tell myself, oh my gosh, if my son was here, it would have been like this. And that's when I felt grief. and I felt the loss of my son. Because when I lost him, yes, I lost my son. My mindset was different. I need to focus on having a baby. I need to be calm. I need to have a positive mindset. Let me just bag that somewhere in the back of my mind, and I'll deal with it later on. And immediately, almost literally, when my daughter was born, as soon as I got home, within this first couple of days, I know our hormones are all over the place as well. That is when I really went through dealing with the loss of my son. So it is something that's very common. For me, it was my way of dealing with the loss, maybe, But I would suggest to everybody is that don't do that in terms of, let's not forget about it. We have to deal with it. We need to talk about it. And creating conversations like this and safe spaces for everyone to talk about it. We really are ourselves. Like for me, when I did see a counselor when I lost my son as well, I did see a psychologist and a counselor and everything. I just felt that, oh no, no one's going to understand my pain. And I can't cry in front of somebody because they're going to see me as weak, or they're going to judge me, or something like that's going to happen in that whole session. And for me, it was like, no, just keep it in. And I just know my pain. Only I understand. But then later on, I realized that I'm not the only one who goes through a loss. And it's common and it's normal. And to talk about it, and that's what I do all the time. I always talk about my losses. And if I cry about it too while talking, I'm human about it and I accept it. So for me, it's like, no, we should not keep quiet about our losses. We need to talk about it. Even if it's not to that gynae that we saw, there are other doctors we could talk about. There are colleagues, there are support groups. They reach out to psychologists, counselors, reach out to them, and you have to share it to feel they will know what to do for us and they might know how to guide us. And sometimes we just want that. We will never say, I want to talk to somebody. No, but they must just come to us. And unfortunately, no one's going to know our loss until we talk about it. So yes, I would definitely encourage people, please don't be quiet about it and reach out to people. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Parishka, and thank you for sharing that with us. Gogo, I've got you next. You haven't introduced yourself yet. You came in a little bit later. Before we go on to the next questions, you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself to the ladies?
Okay. Sorry for being later. I suppose gremlins decided to visit my laptop today. Thank you for the forum. Thank you for the platform. So I was born, I always find it very weird how to introduce myself to anybody for that matter. I was born Mandisa Mapango, but I was gifted to those that I've met and those that I still have to meet as ugogo Nkanyezi yezulu nomhlaba. Okay, I'm a traditional healer. It's easier to identify that way. I'm also a medium because I'm able to channel the spirits of those that have departed. I'm also a herbalist, meaning I can heal as well. And then I've also found myself in the counseling space spiritually, to bring about people to understand what happens, what are the dynamics as well when people depart from this world. So to introduce myself, that's who I am. I'm also a mother and a wife as well, but mother to many people for that matter. Yeah.
Wow, thank you for that beautiful introduction. We're so happy to have you with us. Thank you. I'm going to we're going to open up with our next question, and everybody, please just feel comfortable to answer it as we go along. We don't have to follow sequence. We can all add into it, and I'll just ask someone to start, and then we can just follow on.
Hi,
so
Tanya.
now that we
Sorry
yes
for disturbing you. I really, speaking to my point earlier on around the cultural aspect, I wonder if we can be able to ask Gogo the previous question so she can share some of her insights, because I think she has a strong cultural background of what happens around the gaps.
Sure. Let's open up the question and allow Gogo to answer that one. So sorry, excuse me, everyone. The first question that we all looked at was, what are you finding the gaps currently serving families that have gone through child loss and baby loss, especially with minorities of unprivileged communities? So what would you, Gogo, what would your insights be to the gaps of child loss?
So when I joined in, I hope I'm saying it right, Prasheka was speaking and explaining how culturally on her husband's side, loss is loss. A lot of that I find with a lot of, not only women, men as well, loss is loss. And people feel that once you've gone through loss, you need to move forward as quickly as possible. To many people, it's all about going through the phase of burial. Once you're done, then get back to it. But loss actually comes strictly after, because then you start to mourn. And a lot of people do not get, we live in such a high-paced environment, people don't get to do that. Again comes the defining part of culture, tradition, and spirituality. Somewhere along the lines, all these funnel together. Because to be me, to be a spiritual healer, I follow the path of my ancestors, things that they used to do in the past. There's a lot of gaps where we don't do that anymore. When someone passes, you'll hear stories of someone saying, I really felt like I saw my departed mother. I really felt like she was with me. It's because it's true. Spiritually, they're still there with you. We don't deal with, we deal with burying the body, but we don't know what happens to the soul, do we? We don't know where they are. That's why you feel their presence next to you. So a lot of people do not understand that you mourn the body, the physical aspect of the person that was there, but you also need to mourn the spirit and find closure with that. A lot of people's souls are lost because they don't find a home after that. Yes, you bury the body, but what happens to the spirit? So it's something that I feel there's a huge gap about. Not everyone is open to that conversation. But I found with my work as well, it's across all cultures. I deal with different races, and it's amazing how everyone opens up once they understand. And I guess that's why when there was a question posed to say, why are you joining this webinar? Okay. And from my side, I agreed to it because I feel the more ears that have to hear about what spirituality is about, how it marries into culture, how it marries into the different races, then we'll be able to actually deal with the loss more effectively, understanding more about it. I hope I've answered your question.
You have, thank you. You answered it beautifully. Thank you so much. I'm going to have a look at our next question. And again, thank you all for joining the webinar and agreeing to join the webinar. Okay, so we're going to go back to that question. What would be some of the solutions? So if we were to give hope out there, what would we see as some of the solutions to that gap? What could we envision as a solution? I'm going to open up the floor and I'm going to let whoever wants to start. Think about it. What could we envision as a gap? What could we do? What would be a solution?
I think it's not quite a popular statement, but I think there's a lot of unlearning to do. I think before we learn, we need to unlearn certain things that we adopted as culture and certain things that we adopted as our belief. Like a lot of the speakers have said that, you know, when you miscarry, it's almost like it's your fault. Your body, you're not eating the right things for your body, you're not maybe doing the right things. And also, if you've just lost maybe a toddler to some incident or accident, it is your fault as well. Why were you not looking at your young one 24/7, ensuring that they are safe, you know? So I think we have to, number one, destigmatize miscarriage. Number two, we have to unlearn, like I said, a lot of things that we learned and adapted as part of our language, part of, you know, our thoughts around end of life. And thirdly, now we get to learn. Because after deleting the closet, we need new clothes in the closet. So we need to understand, how do we now move forward, that, you know, we are empowered to make the right decisions, we are informed, we are learning. So yeah, I think those are my key 3 things.
Thank you.
I'll add on there, looking at culture, okay? So in our culture, in the Hindu culture, we believe that when there's a loss, whether it's a pregnancy loss, I mean, the fact that there's a heartbeat, that means there's a soul to that, right? So in our culture, we believe that when there's a loss, that soul re-enters into another body, right? So that's like being born again, basically, okay? So when we go through that loss, we don't really focus on the soul part in our culture of that loss. But yes, sometimes like we might look at the physical part of that body being the loss. And obviously there's emotions, more emotions than anything else with that loss. So, you know, we know where the soul went. We know where this baby's soul is. We don't know where, but we know it's been reborn somewhere. But in my case, where I lost my son, who had a face, who had everything. He had a soul, he had a face, you know. So then we have that whole emotional part of that loss, which in some cases we don't deal with it. Or like how I did, I prolonged it, I ignored it. I'm like, okay, yes, we'll deal with it later. As I said, you know, I bagged it for later on until my baby was born. So that's part of something that, you know, we need to focus on. And as I was saying earlier on as well, is that we need to reach out to people. And I think for people to reach out to others, like when I say others, they can reach out to counselors, colleagues. For somebody who went through a loss, I strongly it's my personal belief that, you know, I would want to talk to somebody who went through that loss. Because the last thing I would want to hear to somebody is that, oh, I'm sorry. You know, sometimes it's the words people use as well that is so important. But I would definitely say people must talk about it. They should, and they must reach out to people. They support groups, counselors, they must do these things. I mean, that's the only way I believe that eventually I felt better, I got help. And that's the only way I could deal with it, from getting help from somebody in a professional way. And that's how, for me, that's how you deal with it and how I dealt with it. So yeah.
Thank you, Prishka. Thank you for sharing that with us. Gogo, would you like to add for us? Would you like to add some things in for us?
Yes. Okay. So obviously on my side, I'll always be an advocate for spirituality. So whenever I discuss something, it will always go back to that, because I feel that's me. That's the journey I've had to go through in order to impart on others that are willing to learn more. So as it was said, yes, adopted culture. There's a lot of wrongs spiritually that people do. Like, for instance, again, going to visit a gravesite. When there's loss, the last thing you want to go is see that the body is now under the earth. You'll never see or be able to touch and feel that person. So that, I feel, it ignites the grief again. So instead of healing, people keep on visiting something that actually sparks it again. Okay, so that's the first thing. Secondly, in our culture, many a times we don't get the platform to be able to let out what you feel inside. And with that, you never get to a phase of understanding where are you within the loss period, within the mourning period. Because if we do share that, we impart it to our kids and our kids' kids, you're able to then see, okay, the healing is there. I'm feeling much better. Someone went through this before me. You know what I mean? Then we're able to heal, because it doesn't go away. When you've lost a child, when you've miscarried, which is another thing, when you've miscarried, that's a sense of loss as well, of something that you never really got to meet, never really got to touch. So you actually lost something. So going through that phases again helps an individual to get through life itself. Okay. And then comes in what I do, which is cleansing. Cleansing, again, I would put it, for instance, the Chinese, when they've lost someone, there is the letting go of the balloons, a sense of grief, a sense of letting go to say, okay, I had this person in my life and now they're gone. So when I cleanse someone, it's also important when we go to the river that I explain that when we cleanse because you had a loss, you are basically just cleansing that emotional connection, but you're not getting rid of the memory of that person. So that's one of the things that I try and introduce as much as possible to make people understand what we do and how we do it and why we do it as well. So from my side, yes, that would actually work. And then again, just don't erase. A lot of the cultures teach you to erase the part of that person, which again, it's a scar that never really goes away. It never goes away. But you can celebrate what you had, what you were blessed with. Okay, thank you.
Tanya, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, thank you. Sinta, would you like to add in a little bit for us? Would you like to add in?
Yes, I'd love to share more about my experience also. I think what happened with me was I had a miscarriage after I already had a son who was almost 4 years old. So I was busy, I had many things to do, so I had to just carry on with life and kind of just cope with it. So I just filed it deep and carried on. In my culture that I grew up in, it's not also really something we talk about. People aren't comfortable having those conversations. So everybody kind of looks the other way and carries on with their own things. There's never really a conversation about it. Nobody ever asks you, how do you feel? How are you doing? And what happened with me is, it was about 6 months after my miscarriage, I accidentally ran into somebody that I knew who was actually a psychologist. And he asked me, so how are you doing? How are you dealing with the miscarriage? How are you doing? And when he asked me that question, I burst into tears and I started sobbing. And that was actually the first time I actually showed any emotion of any kind about what I was feeling. I just buried it so deep and just kind of ignored the situation. And it took that question from somebody else to literally prompt me to face my loss for the first time. And while I'm telling you the story, it actually shows how valuable counseling is, because somebody needs to ask that question. Somebody needs to open that conversation. And we talked about education. We need the spiritual education within all our different cultures, and we need the practical education also, to know that people deal with it differently, to know that the father and the mother are going to deal with it differently. In my case, my husband at the time wept. He cried a lot. He was able to show his sadness and his grief and his disappointment. And then after a few days, he got up and carried on, and he seemed okay. But we've long since divorced, and it's many years ago, but even the two of us have never even talked about it, which I find quite interesting. You know, it's just something that happened in the past, and it's gone and forgotten almost. And then fairly recently, I did some family constellation work, which taught me that this child that was conceived, but that was not carried full term, is actually a part of my family, and that I should honor that child. And that we as a family should honor that child and give that child her rightful place in our family. And that was a very healing exercise for me to do. And then I sat down with my children and I shared the story with them. And I actually had to tell my third child, who is my third child, but my second son, that he's actually my third child. They all knew about the miscarriage, but we never gave it any place in our family, any status, I almost want to use the word. So it was a very healing exercise for all of us. And what you learn from family constellations is that void, that miscarried baby or the stillborn baby or the child that died young leaves in the family constellation. And the impact it has on the children that follow after that is quite interesting, fascinating actually. So yes, there's so much to learn. And I agree with what Tavi said, we have to unlearn so many things. And Gogo, you also mentioned many interesting things about the different cultures. It's actually so interesting how different cultures see the transition from life to death or the afterlife and what happens to our spirits. And as a community, I think we also need to find solutions in terms of accommodating all those different cultures, different beliefs, and how we deal with it. But it starts with, I think, an awareness of the loss. Prashika, you also mentioned the loss. That, I don't think we regard it as a loss, especially miscarriages. The things I was told and the things I hear so often when I support people is, it was not meant to be. So just accept it as that and carry on with your life. And I think that's hurtful, actually. It's harmful, actually, is the word I'd rather use. To just shrug it off as something that was not meant to be and forget. Yeah, thank you.
Hi,
Cynthia,
Tracy.
thank you. Thank you.
Hi. Hi,
Hi.
Tanya.
Hi, Gogo.
I just wanted to add a little story in there. When Cinta was talking about how it was brought to her that the lost child must actually be acknowledged. I deal with so many people every single day. And it's funny, I spent most of the time on the phone because most of my consultation actually happens over the phone, video or WhatsApp conversations. So I had an interesting family whereby sixth generation came through, and she had some issues that she was dealing with. We consulted, we chatted, we started the process in terms of her cleansing. And we can't right all the wrongs from the past, but we start somewhere. And I always tell people that in the spiritual world, you kind of ask way forward to those that have lived before. Okay, we'll get into that some other time. But then she brought her aunt. Then the aunt came with someone else and her children. And through the consultation, they kept on saying, you know what, there's something that's bugging us as a family. We keep on losing a lot of family members in strange ways, whether they commit suicide, whether they get into accidents or murder. But we experience a lot of that, Gogo, and it's such a big problem. We really want to know what's going on. And through my consultation, we found where the issue exactly is. Because first thing in our culture, when there's such wrong, when there's a lot of death, witchcraft. We always run to blaming witchcraft. And I said to them, listen, we'll find what the problem is. Consulted, and then I said, oh, there's the answer. There's a soul of a boy that died, and the elders concealed what happened because he was actually beaten. He was a young boy. I think he was about 8, 9 years old. And he did something back in the day, and the father beat him so badly that he actually died. So everybody that was present on that day concealed that, and they carried on as per normal. But this young boy, his soul was crying so much. That's why it's affecting each and every generation. So when they look back, I said, the reason why you're having all of this, it's because he was a boy. So none of you are having boys. It's the boys that are actually passing away. He's trying to channel this message that I'm forgotten. I'm a forgotten soul. Why are they hiding me? Why are they hiding what happened? I understand that my father beat me up. It was an accident. I died that day. But why am I being forgotten? And no one knew about the story. All the people that were in the room were like, no, there's no such. We don't know about such. As I said to them, listen, if there's anyone still within that generation, just ask them. They went back. And I was actually shocked when almost the whole family came to my yard. Because the one old lady that was still alive said, yes, you're right. That is exactly what happened. And I said to her, that's why each and every generation that you're having, all the boys are passing away weirdly so, either being murdered somewhere out there, car accident, or they actually kill themselves. So again, it brings us back to understanding that when you have lost a child, anybody for that matter, you need to acknowledge, to say, my child, you chose me as your mother. You couldn't live with us today, but you're still my child. And that soul does not become restless going forward. I just remembered that story.
Thank you, Gogo. That was really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to let Tabi direct some questions and open up. She's also going to be assisting me with the webinar today. So she's joining me and helping me also to present the webinar and be a moderator with me. Tabi, I'm going to hand over to you for a little bit, and you're welcome to open up on the next question.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Wow, what an eye-opener. I wish we had a big broadcast. These are conversations that are so needed in the communities. And I think the biggest takeaway I took from the last question was the acknowledgement. That's my first time hearing that you actually need to acknowledge your departed loved one. And I think it's amazing because I've been watching some videos online, and there's a mother who lost their son, I think in a tragic, I think the son drowned, and then got to have another baby. And then the daughter grew up and she kept on seeing the son. And the conversation was not there. And to Cinta's talk, to say that she had to actually tell the other siblings that, look, you actually have a sibling, so that it's not even a scary experience for them when they keep on seeing this child who comes to visit them, you know? So I think that's quite captured beautifully. And I do wish that we'll share this broadcast with so many people, because it's really eye-opening information that needs to really get out. And to your story as well, Gokonganyes, I think it's not only that family, but there's a lot of families that experience such traumas and they don't actually know where the root of the problem began. So thank you so much for that. So I think the next question is really around your personal experience with arranging now, you know, the send-off of your loved one, your departed loved one. If you are able to share with us, please share with us that experience of, you know, taking your heavenly angel and giving them that dignified send-off. What were some of the highs? What were some of the lows? What were the lessons? Was it the finances? Was it the funeral homes? Was it chasing for coats? How was that experience? So if it's open on the floor, anyone can really take it.
I'll share my story here, okay? And obviously, to give you a little bit of content, I'm formerly from Durban and moved up to Johannesburg, okay? So from the time my family's been up in Johannesburg, losing my son was the first loss that we had of losing someone close to us, right? Because in Durban, it's simple how we do a funeral, okay? Because in the Indian culture and my culture, we cremate. But we never thought about it up in Johannesburg because we don't even know where to cremate in Johannesburg. And when we went through the loss of my son, we didn't know what to do actually, because we were dealing with that loss. So I was happy that, hey, I didn't have to focus on anything about the funeral because there's family there. So what we had to do is being in Johannesburg and not knowing anything, because as I said, in Durban, it's different. We know everybody. We just know who to phone and everything's done. But now we are all like, we felt alone for that moment as well. And it was my uncle actually, who was actually arranging the funeral. But then there was a problem. Because as I said, although my husband and I are Hindus, right? His cultural belief was a little bit different from my belief, and something we never thought about. It was never an issue or anything of that sort. Because what we believe, my family, we believe in cremating. And in my husband's family, they believe that when it's an early loss, like my son, a premature, they have to bury. And for me, it was the first time I heard the word bury, because we never did this before. And it's the first time I heard the word tombstone. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the first time I'm hearing we need to book a space. I clearly remember these words, booking a space. I'm like, what do you mean book a space? We have to buy a so-called space. I'm like, what is this? And throughout this whole loss, the funeral arrangement process, right? My granddad was with us, and he's the eldest in our family. And yes, with him as well, his cultural belief is that we also cremate, but we respected what my husband's family wanted this time. And they wanted to bury. It was like, fine. Because at that moment, you are not going to fight about these things, because whatever happens is going to happen, because we're all going through emotions. So when we did eventually get through to the burial stage, that was all arranged with the funeral services and stuff. And my uncle had to book a space, and there were options of where you have to bury. Where I could bury at that time. So we did all of that. And after the burial, right? Now I feel that almost 5 years later for me, I feel personally it's like, oh my gosh, if I have to ever leave this country or anything happens, I always come back to this country, because a part of me is this country, right? And we were talking, Santa had an example about awareness, right? And with the family, with my daughter, and she's only turning 3, so she's literally still a baby for me, right? Her room, if we come into her room and see pictures of her room is pink, gray, and elephants. And in the one picture, there is an elephant with wings, right? There's a mother elephant, a father elephant that depicts my husband and I, the baby, the elephant that depicts my daughter. And there's one elephant with wings, because I introduced her and like, you're not the firstborn, you're not the only born in the family. You might be alive as the only child, but you're not, right? I introduced her to that. I create that awareness, although she's so small. And we go to the cemetery. We know something we used to, but we have to do it now. Now I have a space that's part of me there. I take her there to go and visit. And it's odd. It's just odd for me to go to a cemetery, because I've never had it before. I've never experienced that before. So culturally, it's very different for me going to a cemetery, taking my daughter there, having a tombstone there. And, I won't take flowers. I don't take balloons. I don't take anything to a cemetery. We go there, but we just go there. And I don't know how people do this, okay? But I'm going to share this, it's my experience. It's like one step, I feel I'm stepping onto somebody else, another baby. I have to be so careful when you walk there, not to kind of step onto something. Not every so-called cremated person there has a tombstone. Not everything is marked off, right? You'll just see a heap of sand and you might walk through all of this. So it's very different for me. And I'm still trying to deal with that part. Every time now we go there and taking my baby with me, I'm like, be careful where you walk. Because for me, culturally, if I have to step on it, it's okay for me. I don't have, but now there's other beliefs, you don't want to offend anybody's belief. And no, baby, walk carefully, walk behind mommy And that's how we do it. So it is about creating that awareness with my daughter and my family, then creating awareness with my extended family who are also, it's the first time that we're going through a burial and they're exposed to this. So when we do go to the cemetery, you know, it's like, we don't even know how to react when we see so many babies being buried there. When we had buried my son, there wasn't many. The following week or the month that we went to see him, oh my gosh, there's so many buried next to him. So for us, my family, it was very surprising. We don't know how to react to that, and they don't know. Sometimes I get family that come out from Durban to visit, and then we'll go visit my son, because I believe that we have to create. My son was part of our family. He has our surname. He's there. He is the so-called my firstborn, you know, that I delivered, that I gave birth to. He came off me. He came out of me. He was there for a whole week that he survived, you know. And I'm going to share this with you, right, with everybody here. When my son was 3 days old and we were in hospital, he was obviously on the ventilator. He's a premature baby, 29 weeks, very small and tiny, 1 kg and 98 grams to be exactly and precise. So during that time, my husband used to call him something, right? And now you don't know whether this child can hear or can see or anything that what's going on. But the day and that moment, my husband called out to him, my child literally turned up and looked at my son, at my husband. And it's like, we were so amazed. It's the small things that he did that created memories for us. So it's not as though we have a memory of him just being in hospital or in the NICU or in the machines. No, it's small things. We created memories, and we love sharing it with my daughter, as small as she is. We tell her all the time, this is what happened and this is how it happened. It's to create that awareness. And for me, the first step was to have that space in my daughter's room of the elephant, which depicts her brother. And then there's another picture of 2 elephants only, which is the one that has wings and one is my daughter. And I have both their names there. And it says there, I got your back always, you know, for the daughter. And I always tell her that, no, you must remember, you can always talk to your brother, and remember, he's always here to protect you, because when you lose somebody, it's like, you don't want to feel that, oh no, it's gone, it's over. I want to create that awareness to make her know that we believe in the soul's being reborn and your brother's reborn somewhere else, but he'll always be with you. So I think it's so important to have that awareness, and again, to the acknowledging the child that you lost.
Thank you so much, Prisheka. That was both empowering and impactful. I believe that people will be watching this who will learn from your experience and, you know, sort of be empowered to also understand how to navigate through this journey. Senta, are you happy to share your experience with us?
Yes, sure. Thank you for that beautiful story, Prashika. I just see the elephant with the wings. I think it's beautiful what you did. It's interesting to learn from everybody how some cultures are totally comfortable with that and others are not. In my family, we have also lost a number of children. One little boy, they were actually twins, a little boy and a little girl who were born premature. The little boy passed away after, I think, a month or so, and the little girl actually grew up, and she's a beautiful, beautiful young woman. But that loss is something that nobody ever talks about. His name is never mentioned. In fact, we have been told to not mention his name, to not talk about him. And it's just so weird. Listening to Prashika's story, it's even more weird for me that we don't talk about it, you know? I also lost my godson a couple of years ago. As a grown man, he was 24 at the time. He died from a motorcycle accident. But the same thing there. we went through the funeral and the rituals that is typical to our culture, but since then, there's no conversation about him. There aren't memories shared. It's like it's an uncomfortable topic. It's like become a taboo almost to speak about it. And I'm wondering whether it's because people are afraid to become emotionally overwhelmed again, or to, be triggered, or that the memories would upset them again. If people are just avoiding it because it's too painful. And if it's really, maybe for some people who want to, I would not necessarily say they want to forget him, but to forget the painful experience as such. So the loss, I think, doesn't, no matter what the age of the family member is something we need to acknowledge. And that person we need to hold that space for that person. Especially also, I'm thinking about special occasions like Christmas and birthdays and things like that. Do we honor the loved ones that we've lost? Do they have a place or a space in those celebrations? And then I'm also thinking of how that affects the children that come afterwards, like with a miscarriage or a child that dies very young. I'd be interested to learn more about the following children's perspective of that, what the impact is on those children to see the parents suffer so much, to see the parents go through the grief in the morning. And every time that birthday comes up, or every time that, the date of the miscarriage or something comes up, the parents go through that. The impact that it has on the other children must be also quite immense in some cases. So yeah, for me, there was absolutely no ceremony, no ritual, nothing. It was literally medical waste that was disposed of, and that was it. And it was not meant to be, and that was what everybody was told, and that was the extent of the conversation. So there was nothing. I did, however, many years later, fairly recently, as I was going through my menopause, I had an interesting experience one day, which I will share. As part of the premenopausal process, I had a bleeding 1 month. And that experience actually triggered so many memories in me of the miscarriage that I had. It was interesting that it happened so many years later. And then when all those things came up for me again, and I really triggered all those emotions, and I think it's because I was going through the menopause, realizing that I'm going through the end of my fertile period, and the chance of having another child is now forever gone. And I'm transitioning from being a fertile woman to becoming an elder in my community, or going into my crone, as some cultures call it. And I think it just made me realize for the first time what that loss meant in so many other ways. So I actually created a ritual for myself, and I did it by myself. I was alone at the time on that day. So I made a ritual of it and honored my lost child with the bleeding and everything. It actually became something quite beautiful, and I was able, for the first time after so many years, to really just cry again and feel that pain and that sorrow, and honor that loss, and honor my body for what it had gone through. Because that's something else that we don't also pay much attention to. The mother's body that carried that growing child also goes through a lot of changes that impacts you. Prashika, you mentioned you actually lost your one tube as a result of the ectopic pregnancy. And I know there are cultures who do beautiful rituals with the remains. I don't know if that's the right word to use, actually, come to think of it. Please help me out there. Yeah, the remains, is that the word that we're supposed to use? But yeah, I know there are cultures that have beautiful rituals with these things. In my culture, these things don't exist. Interesting.
Thank you so much, Senta. What a beautiful perspective. And one or two things I keep on hearing that Gogo Nganyeza would really like you to come and chip in on is the fact that I'm getting to understand how important the spiritual aspect and cultural aspect and certain rituals are in dealing with end of life and, with navigating through that journey. I think after you've spoken, Gogo Ganyes, I'd also like to get a perspective from Prisheka and Sinta around maybe two rituals that you know of that are practiced. I think Sinta, you mentioned that you really don't know much rituals that are, done in your culture. So if you can just give a perspective, Gogo Ganyes, maybe if it's like 2 or 3 rituals that in the African context, African culture, are done so that we are really able to educate mummies that are watching this and that have went through this process and now they are realizing that what, actually I did not do 1, 2, 3, and like you said in your story earlier on, that when certain rituals are not practiced in some cultures, it actually does have serious repercussions. So if you can maybe really touch on that before we move to the next question.
All right. So from my side, as listening through everything, I think it's important what you said is the unlearning part, because with the unlearning comes off the peeling of judgment towards what we do specifically. I always try by all means to try and educate people what I do, that I am a person as well. I never asked for this. This was a gift that, trust me, I tried to run away for years and it affected me so much. And to eventually say, actually, the voices that I hear are coming to good use now because I'm able to understand my purpose in life. So one of the things that I just wanted to touch on was back in the day, I don't know, in my age, I remember when you had a miscarriage or you went through the cleaning process in hospital, when you had a stillborn or your baby died while you were still in hospital, they would just dispose of the remains. Cinta, you're right. I don't know which word to use, if it's right to say that. Yes, they treated it as a medical waste, but that is a soul. As Prisheka said, it's a soul. It was alive. There was a heartbeat. So they've since changed that, where when there is such a loss in hospital, they would ask you, do you want the remains? And then families would actually come and fetch, but not host a big African a send-off that we normally have, but it will be just private where the family takes the remains. So on, I know families that have what we call iganzelo as well, whereby there is a certain tree within the family home, where if there was a miscarriage, where if there was a stillborn, they would actually bury within the yard. I know that some families actually still do that. So we do that again because if the reason why hospitals have changed, that there were a lot of families going back to the hospital requesting for the remains, because they would find you'd carry on with your life as culturally, that's what we're supposed to do, but you don't carry on with life. There is some type of a blockage that happens, and then when that happens, it takes you back to the departed. So I'm happy that the hospitals are opening that up. And then what I've also encouraged in terms of the final process of funerals, I always try and educate people to say, you need to find a way to fetch the spirit. Sibizwa ukulandwa komoya. I always encourage that, because we are one, we are family within the living. Let that soul be one as well with your ancestors. So you need to fetch that spirit. So whether it was a car accident, whether it's in hospital, I always encourage that needs to happen. It's very, very important. And then when it comes to when I'm dealing with a family that has lost a loved one, when they ask me, Gogo, what are we supposed to do? Is this the right procedure? Because remember, we are living in such a westernized world that some of these things have been left out for so many years. But again, when you see the influx of sangomas, it's our generation that is also trying to fix, trying to get to know what needs to be done. And when someone asks me, how did you know, Gogo? How could you feel the departed? I always try and explain, I don't know, in this panel, if anyone knows the movie Ghost, the one with Whoopi Goldberg and Patrick Swayze. I always refer to that movie, and I tell people that's how I feel, because the departed makes me feel, makes me see. So most of the time I'll tell you this person died of A, B, and C because they make me feel what they went through. They make me see. So it's very important that last wishes as well are also carried through in the funeral terms. And as difficult as it is, that's why end of life is very important. Getting to know what that person's last wishes are, because it's the last few days, last few hours, they really want to be carried in such a way. So I can't wait for platforms such as this, for opportunities where mothers can actually share how they feel, and not to be swept under the carpet, and not be told, "Imbogodo, you are strong, you can handle this." No, break down if you have to. Feel it, feel that phase. You have to feel it and be able to carry on with your life, knowing that you had a child. That child's soul is still there with you. I hope I've answered your questions.
No, absolutely. And I think that, you said it so beautifully and the key thing that keeps on reappearing is really the acknowledgement of the departed loved one. So yeah, I think, like you're saying, that we need a healthy space to be able to discuss, such conversations and allow ourselves to feel. I think the most painful thing that most mothers who have heavenly angels is the lack of space to deal with grief the best way they know how. So thank you for those pearls of wisdom. And I think, of course, you mentioned one of the rituals that needs to be done, which is Ogulandwa, which is quite significant, particularly for people in our culture. Because I know, and I'll share the story briefly, there was a sport in, was it Broncospruit, I think, where there used to be so many accidents. Every year around the same time, there's an accident, and one family decided to, of course, get assistance from, people such as yourself, Gogo Nganyezi. And Gogo Nganyezi went there and said, there are actually so many souls that have not been collected from the sport. They are the ones that are causing these problems. So I think, to your earlier point, that when we don't do certain rituals, it does come back to bite us at the end. So thank you very much for that. Prishika, I'm not sure if you want to share how, your cultural experience shaped how you do death care and how you're dealing with grief.
So in culture, in our culture, what happens is like for my son, for example, there is a prayer that they do. It's an annual prayer that they do where they acknowledge the dead, right? It's called Peter Pak, right? So they're acknowledging the people that we've lost. For example, like, it's not mine, it's my husband's culture. What they will do is they would take out like a variety of a spread, maybe of food that they liked or something that they liked. And, they will place it out there. And yeah, but what happened is my culture now, not my husband's, like my culture, right? Because now, when your husband and you share the same loss, it's like we're sitting, my husband and I are like, okay, what are we supposed to do? Because his mom says this and my mom says this, and the both of us, we talk about generations now. It's like we are that generation who like, okay, we will do what they tell us to do. And if they tell us to do something that we don't like, okay, we'll skip it, right? So like for my husband, like his mom would call him, although she's in India, and say, listen, it's Pitar Pak time, you need to fast. So that means fasting would mean not eating meat, staying away from that, just being basically a vegetarian, you know, no eggs, no fish, nothing. And for him, it's like, okay, my mom phoned me, but it so happens coincidentally for him, he says, this is what my husband says, he always ends up eating meat in any case, because we don't follow what the culture is or the rituals are, right? So I'm going to share this, right? This is something after I lost my son, I felt, and I've shared it with a very few people, and I'm going to share it in this group, is that I felt that, you know, God made me pregnant, but then he took away my baby and he took away everything. And then, like, you know, you become angry. It's like, why did I lose my son? Why? And the obvious question is, why me? You know, you're always asking that question. And then if you pray, whichever, it doesn't matter what's your culture, but if you are praying, it's like you're praying to somebody or to someone or something, and you want someone or that thing to answer you, why me? You know? So I went to a stage where eventually, after I lost my son, and we did the funeral the way we were supposed to do culturally, right? But after that, I was like, you know what? I was angry. I was so angry about it. I'm like, no, I'm not going to pray anymore. And forget about it. I'm not going to believe in this. I stopped praying. I stopped believing in everything that I used to believe in. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do all of this anymore. And now that my daughter is born, and I'm like, I was talking to a colleague, it's like, how do I bring my daughter up now? Because I say to myself that I don't pray and I don't believe in a God anymore or anything. What's my daughter going to learn? Because she's going to be the only child as well. What does she know? And, you know, like Gogo was saying that, and Tabi, you also said that, you know, Gogo's story about that whole couple generation of that loss of that boy, and nobody wanted to believe it until fortunate for that family, there was an elderly person who could say, yes, that story is true, and who could validate everything. So now I'm questioning, right now in my life, I'm questioning, what do I teach my child? And what do I teach my daughter? What is she going to know? You know, yes, I didn't pray and I didn't believe in a God because I was angry. I acknowledged that, right? I know. And losing my son he was not healthy to be born at that time. Or I would say things to myself, like how Senta was saying, she created her own ritual to deal with her loss. So it's not a ritual that's like cultural ritual, but it's her own ritual. So my ritual is like, no, you know what? This is my son. I acknowledge him. I know he's here with me. Although culturally we believe he's reborn, but I believe in that. It's my personal thing. Like even when I started my business, for example, I acknowledge my son by having my logo with my son's alphabet in there. So these are small things that we do, personal acknowledgements that we do. But then you think now, okay, like from listening to Gogo as well here, what do I teach my daughter now? What is she going to acknowledge? Because she can't come up now following what I do, because that's not cultural in there. There's nothing in there. It's my own personal ritual. So culture, I feel, is so important to everybody. Yes, when we get angry we say we're angry at God, we're angry at everything, and we forget about it. And then like, now we need to go back and like re-look at it and like, we acknowledge what God did, you know. We were pregnant. Like how Senta said, she acknowledged her body when it went through that loss, you know. It's important that we do these things. And I think everybody would find their own way of dealing with it. But we cannot run away from culture at the end of the day, because what's going to happen to the new generation or the next generation of people? So I would carry on following what my husband's family does say, and his cultural belief of doing the prayer that they do to acknowledge the people that we lost, so that my daughter learns something, so I can teach her something. I started to pray again so that my daughter learns something, because I know she's gonna learn from me. And then the only way she's gonna learn from me is like, Mommy, why do you do this? Mommy, why are you doing that? And if I don't do it and she goes to school and she's exposed to something, she'll come back, Mommy, why don't we do this? What do we do? And how would I answer them? So before she gets to that age, I'm like, quickly, composing myself and like dealing with this. Like, okay, what do I want to do? How am I going to answer these questions? So like we started praying again, and like now my daughter, we pray as a family, you know. She sits with us when we pray. She's learning all this. Culturally, I know I'm equipping her for the times when she will, if she has to ever go through something, she knows what to do and how to do it. And it won't be a situation like she will be grieving and or going through some pain and not knowing what pain she's going through. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Prisheka. And I think you touched on a very important subject around, involving your child and having her learn now how to deal with grief and how to deal with loss. And I think last year we were having an event with Keshini, and she really touched on, if you bought your child a goldfish and the goldfish dies, don't go buy another one. You need to make your child understand that the goldfish has passed, and they went through the loss, and allow them to deal with loss, because that's how you're really teaching them to adapt, not to necessarily adapt, but to navigate through this journey of losing a child. Cynthia, you touched on quite a very important subject, which I'd like us to maybe revisit. I want to know, what were some of the rituals that you created by yourself, and what did you do to help your body go through that, or rather cope or move forward with the child loss?
I'm happy to share that, Tavi. It might be a bit gory for some people, because it was all around the bleeding and the blood that came out. I collected some of it, and I went to sit out in the garden, and I talked out loud. It was almost like I gave a final farewell message to my child. I talked out loud, expressing how I felt. I actually, when I did the family constellation work, named my child that I lost. So I spoke to her and mentioned her name and said, I love you, and I'm so sorry that you cannot live here with me and with the rest of the family. And I put the blood that I collected down on the ground and looked at it while I was talking through. I was just kind of sharing my thoughts and my emotions and feelings about it. And then afterwards, I felt that I wanted to almost make my own miniature cremation. So I set it on fire and I burnt it. And I looked at the flames. And for me, that was the closure. It was, it came from my body, but it's the physical aspect of it is no longer alive. So I burnt that, and I watched it until it had all burnt out into ashes. And then I actually took the ashes into my hands and I rubbed them through my fingers. It may sound weird, but that was what I instinctively felt like doing. I held it in my hands almost as if to keep it safe or nurture it. And that was how I managed to. It was almost like I had my own little funeral, and said farewell and parted with that. But the blood was the meaningful thing that triggered all my emotions and the memories and helped me to do that. And the other thing that I was doing as part of this was, this came out of my body, this beautiful body that actually bore me 3 children, and I honored my body and thanked my body. And this is actually something that I do regularly. I tell my body, actually, I love you, I appreciate you, I honor you, and I'm grateful for what you've given me. And whereas previously there was a certain level of feeling that my body had failed me because of the miscarriage, the bit of guilt of maybe I did something wrong, maybe there's something wrong with my body. And I made peace with that and honored my body and said, it's not because of anything that was done incorrectly. It's not because there's anything wrong with my body. It's just how it happened. It's just how it played out, how life rolled out for us. at that time. And it brings me to another topic that I actually would also love for us to talk about maybe in the next round, is the impact that it has on the trauma, that has on our next pregnancies. Carrying that trauma, that unresolved trauma, not dealing with it, not being able to talk about it, how that affects us in our subsequent pregnancies. Because the pregnancy that I had after that loss, I had many problems, many challenges. I actually had a lung embolism when I was about 5 months pregnant, and both myself and the baby nearly died. It was, again, a very traumatic experience. There were lots of complications in the pregnancy. And I believe today that it could be as a result of the unresolved trauma. I remember just the fear that I carried into the next pregnancy, just the fear that I might miscarry again. You know, being over sensitive, being over careful, being almost afraid to live my life normally because something might go wrong again. So I'd be quite interested to hear anybody else's experience with that as well. Thanks.
Wow, thank you so much, Cinta. I mean, this is just mind-blowing for me. You know, the different experiences, the different cultural beliefs, the different approach to how, you know, each and every one of you has been dealing with, you know, child loss. And I think to that, as we've said today, that we really want to discuss the cultural dynamics, the different beliefs. And I asked my previous question simply because there are certain beliefs that prohibits you from acknowledging the departed, you know, and you are sitting there and you're a mother and your child comes through to visit you and they're told you must not have any engagement with this demon. This is a demon, it's not your child, you know. And that's where you sort of leave it off of there because you're also afraid of, you know, of inviting demons into your life, and you're not given the opportunity to say, this is my departed loved one, and I really want to acknowledge them. I want everyone to understand that this was a part of me and they'll remain being a part of my life. And Ngoko Nkanyezi, I think I'd really love for you to touch on what are some of the rituals that are done to a woman's body when they've miscarried.
Gogo, can I just say something before we go on to the ritual part? We're going to also leave some hopeful messages to the moms that are going to be experiencing Mother Day after a loss. And the one beautiful thing Keshni taught me, and it's not a ritual, or it's not really something that would be a ritual, but was to say the name your babies and say their name. And that really stuck with me. And that's the most beautiful thing I could do, because up until the time I had my loss, I never named the babies, and it was 2 babies. I never did the naming. And when Keshni said, give yourself the permission, name your babies and say their name. So that was just something I wanted to add in while we were talking about what we did, you know, to cope through the loss. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I don't know how I forgot to, you know, also gain your experience and your rituals so that we are able to acknowledge it, you know, your point of view as well and your experiences. But maybe you can also share with us what were some of the learnings culturally in terms of, you know, the rituals and, you know, everything that needs to take place. And also, how was arranging that funeral? Was it different? Because you talk about 2 losses. What was the first one the same as the second one? And what was different? Were the highs? What were the lows? What do you feel like you could have improved on?
So there was no arrangement. It was actually twins that were lost. And just as, you know, as Cinta was saying, with my culture very much too, it was something of, you don't speak about it, you don't go through the process, you don't do the mourning, you don't say the names, you sort of got to like accept that this has happened and you got to move on. And very much on the same lines of, you're strong, you can get through this. It wasn't meant to be. But it also, again, was put off as medical waste. So there was never closure. There was never that closure to losing the twins. There was never doing something special. There was never that moment that I got to experience that pain, because it was very much of, just get yourself together. This has happened. It happens to us, and move forward from it. And it was only much later on when I started getting involved with Keshni and Keshni's work that I got to understand, it did impact me. And as Cinta was saying, the pregnancies thereafter were also really terrible. There were 2 pregnancies after, and everything that could possibly go wrong also went wrong. And again, I believe it was because I never acknowledged that trauma. I never acknowledged the loss of those 2 babies. So my culture as well, very much like, no, just get over it, move on. And unfortunately, it was also put off as medical waste.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And I'm glad I let you speak, because you touched on a very important subject that ties to a ritual which I want Ugogo Nganyezi to explain. And maybe some of you may not know this ritual, but it is quite important in the African culture. Gogo Nganyezi, before you answer the question I asked, in the issue of twins, there are certain rituals that need to be done in the African culture.
Yes.
And when you lose a child, maybe a premature, and the one twin survives, do you do those rituals? At what age do you start doing the twin ritual? And maybe you can start by explaining what happens in that ritual.
Okay, so I won't go too much into detail on that one, because as a healer, there are certain things that are not open to overexpose at any time. There are things that we still need to keep sacred. And I think that's why most of the time I just watch, and I'm so shocked that so many of the things are being told and not being narrated properly, which is another thing that causes the confusion around what we do. So yes, with twins, there are certain rituals that are done, because remember, you were both in one womb, basically. That's why you find sometimes if you get a twin, when they talk, you can kind of see that they finish each other's sentences. So that person was actually part of you. So there is a cleansing, a process that needs to be done. And there is no age where you need to say, at this age, do you do it? Because sometimes you find this twin is born, the other one did not make it. And the twin that is alive does not sleep, is forever restless. And whatever they do medically, they run around, the family does not know what is wrong. It's because the soul of the other twin is still with the living twin. So there is no time frame to say this is the exact time. It happens when it happens. You do find the families that are proactive, that know that, okay, when this happens, we need to attend to this so that this living twin can actually have a good life. Again, you need to name the twin that has also passed away. Okay, so that's how it works. But I just wanted to touch on as well that although we are of different cultures, some things are very similar. When Cinta talked about, oh, I'm gonna tell you a story, it might be gory. Trust me, I've seen all the gories in my life. Nothing is gory, because what you actually did is actually similar to what we do when we do a cleansing, when we use the blood of an animal. It's similar in that sense, because that's how we actually cleanse on our side. That's what the one part. The second part is actually postpartum, whereby we need to help the body heal. That's when you get certain herbs, you get umhlonyana, you get umhlabelo. Those are the things that actually help. There's imithi that we use that help your body heal from the inside. There's certain herbs that are specifically for the womb itself, which also helps when you had a miscarriage. Because remember, when you have a miscarriage, we don't really know the finer detail why you actually lost the baby. So it's very important that you go through that process of womb cleaning. There's many things that I do. It's imbiza, which is what I mix through. You drink it, it helps clean your bloodstream as well, where I take you for a cleansing. So there's quite a few things that we go through. And again, when we go to the river, partly we also have umnigelo, the English word actually escapes me. Maybe you can help there, Tabsile. Where when it's a case of umntwana, a baby that was lost, you actually take through sweets, you take through fruits, you've got Simba chips, things that you know kids love. It's because you're going there and you're going to connect with the spirit of a child. So there's certain things that we do there as well, and then you give the child a name. It's very important because once you acknowledge them, you give them a name. Yeah, so those are the most important parts that I go through with mothers. Some mothers actually come, they're facing so many difficulties until I pinpoint that this loss is the issues, is actually the core, the root of all your problems. We need to fix this, and then you can continue with your life. Once we've gone through this process, then you find their lives actually become better. If they've had another pregnancy, then they would notice the difference with the living child because they get affected some way or the other, which is important again that we acknowledge and we understand that there's certain steps that you need to do and you need to carry through for the living to actually be at peace as well.
Thank you so much for the beautiful insights, Bakunganyezi. It's quite, like I said, it's quite empowering to have these conversations because I really feel like there's a lot of stigma attached to child loss. And there's a lot of blame attached to the mother, particularly, to say you're not eating right, you're not doing the right things. And it ends up translating to your thoughts as well as a mother to say, maybe my body wasn't ready, maybe I did, wrong things, or maybe I wasn't even, like Prishika said, maybe God gave me this child and you really didn't want me to have it. So I don't even understand in the first place why this child was here. So moving forward, this is going to be our last question, and then maybe after that we can have a brief Q&A amongst ourselves. I really want to find out the reason behind this event was not only to empower conversations around end of child loss, but it's because on Sunday we're going to be celebrating Mother's Day, and it could be a lot triggering for both people who have lost their mothers and mothers to heavenly angels. And it is unfortunate that some people will be going through this Mother's Day with just have had child loss, and this is their first Mother's Day with dealing with child loss. What are some of the advice that you could possibly give just to empower, just to make their journey a little bit easier, just, for them to know that someone went through this and they are able to navigate. And I think I'll also find strength in what they've went through to also be able to navigate through this journey. Anyone? Sinta, Tanya, Prishika? Oh, go for it. Yeah, okay.
So I just wanted to share, and I just wanted to have this last moment because I am going to have load shedding at 12. Whenever Eskom decides, might be 5 to 12. So on my side, personally, I haven't lost a child. And as I introduced myself and I said I'm a mother of many, it's because 90% of the time I carry all the emotions, all the pain from, I don't want to call them clients, from everyone that interacts with me. So I get to feel that. I saw there was a lady that's actually one of my people I interact with. I always tell them my phone is open 24/7. There's no rest in the spiritual world. Whenever you feel you want to talk to me, whether you send me a message midnight, if I'm awake, I will answer. So my message to any mother out there is that you're still a mother. That child is still out there. The first thing one can actually do is forgive the situation, because many a times we go through things and we get so angry I mean, with me, when I went through my spiritual journey, I also asked myself, why me? Why me? I also want to be out there. I also want to wear the weave. Also want to wear makeup. I want to do this, but I couldn't because there were so many things I had to cut back on. And I couldn't understand. I didn't want to pray. I hated God. I questioned God. I questioned ancestors because I was brought up not to believe that there's ancestors. I was brought up to be told these are demons. There's no sangomas in our generation or the previous generation. So there's no way you can have this. And when I explained that I can see things that you can't see, I can tell you things that you never told me. I speak to different people, Chinese, Hindu, Islam. I can explain some of the things that, I mean, I could not have read about it. So yes, you need to forgive that situation in order to get to the next phase. And also just get an understanding of your pain. What are you feeling? You know, what are you feeling? Because there also comes that pain of post, because now you've bought the clothes, you've got all of those things. What happens with that? You just need to understand where you are with pain and understand that stage and be able to open up about it. I believe each and every one of us on this platform have a way to touch others out there. The more we speak about it, the more we invite other people to join in, other mothers, other fathers for that matter, and bring them in so that we're able to get through this blockade of feeling that you need to pack it away, you need to sweep it, whatever the case might be. We need to deal with it. We need to talk about it. And it's okay to feel what you're feeling. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kokumbanyezi. Ladies, please share your pearls of wisdom.
I think what
You went back on mute, Prishika.
Sorry. I said, just to second what Gogo was saying, it doesn't matter what culture you belong to, right? When you go through a loss, the time that you got that positive, you know, when you see those two lines, you are a mum, there and then. Whether you had an 8-week loss, 6 weeks loss, 20, like in my case, 29 weeks, so even after that child was born, you were a mum. And you will always be a mum to that child. So for me, it's like my first Mother's Day, because I lost my son in December. And I always talk about the one loss that I have. I mean, believe it or not, I had 5 losses, you know, with my ectopic pregnancy. I had 5 losses. And like, you know, Santa was saying just now about the miscarriage. And I'm like, you know, I actually forgot about those miscarriages because now your energy focuses on your child and the one that the baby you lost, because now they had faces to them and they had everything that you could see. And what about my other 4 losses that I had, you know? So it's something for me to obviously think about later on, but like my first Mother's Day when I lost my child. And I think it was my husband. And as a family, we always have big Mother's Day because I wasn't a mom at that time. It was for my mom and my aunts and everybody. So us younger, the kids would have a big spread on Mother's Day, right? And now for that particular Mother's Day, which was the 2019, I don't know, we didn't know what to do. Like everybody's like, you know, you walk on eggshells, like it was like the questions were like, should we ask her what she wants? You know, my cousins were like so scared to talk to me about it and whatever. So eventually what we did do is we had a big spread again. And like, but this time we celebrated me as a mom because I am a mom. Whether I have a physical child, no, at that 2019, it was, I'm a mom. And we acknowledged the loss of my child, but we acknowledged Mother's Day because I am a mom. And I think it's important that during this time, and yes, we're so confused about what we want to do. Shall we acknowledge that we're a mom, or shall we keep it in? And like Senta kept it in until, she entered her menopause of acknowledgement, and like celebrate it. Celebrate your pregnancy, celebrate your loss. Be happy that you were able to see that child or that pregnancy till the stage of whatever happened. Acknowledgement. Create that awareness in your family that there was a baby, there was a loss. I am a mom. Take that role as being a mom. Call yourself the mom. I also say, when it comes to grief, there's no right and wrong about how you grieve. Whether you want to grieve, crying in your room, whether you want to talk about it to somebody, there is no right and wrong. But I believe that go with that feeling. Acknowledge the way you're feeling. Believe the way you're feeling is, I feel this way. I acknowledge it. Believe yourself that, no, I'm feeling sad. But don't go and question, I'm feeling sad. I don't know why. Because deep down, you know why you're feeling sad. Acknowledge it. So it's like, I think it's important for everybody. Acknowledge the way you feel. Acknowledge the child that you had. Acknowledge being a mom. Eventually, at 2020, I was pregnant for that Mother's Day. So we celebrated Mother's Day again for the child we lost. We celebrated Mother's Day for the child that's in me with that heartbeat. We celebrated Mother's Day for my mom. We celebrated. Make it a celebration. For my loss of my son, I always talk as again, for 5 losses, but for the son loss. No, I will not keep quiet about it. I want to mention his name. I want to share his name. Like my son, his name is Veer. And in Hindu, or the Hindi language, it means brave. My son was brave. The time that he fought for the 1 week that he survived, out of me, he was brave. We celebrate these occasions, like my daughter as well. Like we would go to the grave. I acknowledged my son at that time on Mother's Day as well. It wasn't his birthday or his death day, but I acknowledge him. And again, I would call it, it's not a cultural thing for me to go to the grave, but it's a personal him, or to go make sure he knows, whether he knows or doesn't know, we don't know, like I don't know, but he knows that he's loved, he was loved, and he is loved, and he is remembered. Celebrate Mother's Day is all I can say, is that acknowledge being a mother. The day you got that pregnancy, or that those 2 lines say, confirm you're pregnant, celebrate being a mother. You are a mother from that moment. So yeah.
Tanya and Sinta.
So yeah, I wanted to add on to what Prishka was saying, because it's so important. So for me, the way I cope with it is I just allow myself to feel what I need to feel. Not only for the loss, I do acknowledge I was a mom. I am a mom. I've got my earthly babies and my heavenly babies, but acknowledging the way I feel. I allow myself to feel the way I need to feel. Also difficult because I've lost my mom. So that day is a lot of different emotions and different feelings, but I don't allow anybody to say to me, you have to feel this way, you should feel that way. I just allow myself to go through the feeling that I need to feel. And then Spirishka said, you from the time that test comes in positive, you're a mom. And a little bit about me is I'm also a counselor, and I can recall back to the one client I was assisting and saying, you are a mom. And that was so powerful and impactful, because from the time there, those 2 lines, you are a mom. So for that day, whatever emotions, whatever feelings come up, I allow myself that space to feel them. And that assists me getting through the day.
Yes, I would just say ditto to all the beautiful thoughts and advice that everybody shared. I agree, and I think it's beautiful. Thank you very much. And what I would add to that is, to any mom going through Mother's Day, I want to just say, I see you, I acknowledge you, and you have permission to do this in any way that you need to do this. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sinta. Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you so much, Prishika. Thank you so much, Gokunganyezi. The one biggest beautiful takeaway, I've never lost a child, but I really think to what I said earlier on around destigmatizing child loss, the fact that you see those 2 lines make you a mother, whether to an earthly angel or a heavenly angel, you remain a mother. And I think that's one of the most important messaging we can get out there so that people don't blame themselves. Mothers leave knowing that, you know what, you may have not lived, but you chose me as your mother. It may have been for 2 weeks, it may have been for a week, but you chose me. So thank you very much, ladies, for such a beautiful and insightful conversation. And I thank you very much. I know it takes a lot. You had to go down to your emotions, be vulnerable, but it was all for a good cause to be able to empower other women out there. Tanya, I think this is where you come and ascend the stage, and I hand back the mic over to you. And thank you again for hosting us.
Thank you all very, very much for being a part of today. And definitely, as Cinta says, we see the moms that have had a loss. We see them, we acknowledge them, and we are just sending out hopeful messages, and we just see and hear, you know. And thank you, ladies, all for contributing the stories, sharing that part of you. From TWS, the wellness specialist, I'd like to say thank you for being part of the webinar. And thank you for making this discussion an open discussion and creating awareness that this is a topic that we should be allowed to discuss. And even like the ladies were saying, even for the dads, this is something that shouldn't have a stigma. There should be education, and it should be an open discussion that we all freely can have. So thank you, ladies. It was lovely to be in the webinar with you. I hope that you all have a lovely day. It was lovely to spend this time with you, and thank you so much. Thank you for allowing us to hear your stories and your voice.